It was a murder that stunned a community. When the remains of 12-year-old Robin Samsoe were found on July the 2nd, 1979, the schoolgirl had already been missing for 12 days. The police were certain that the killer was a 35-year-old photographer named Rodney Alcala. After his arrest, hundreds of pictures of young women were found in his possession. But who were they? It would take 34 years before Alcala was finally found to be responsible for the death of at least 7 women across 2 states. Orange County Deputy DA Matt Murphy was the 3rd prosecutor to take Alcala to trial for the murder of Robin Samsoe, after the first 2 death penalty sentences were overturned.
The tough part about that, and what nobody thinks about, is there's a victim's family involved in this. And Robin Samsoe had a mother who loved her, and she had brothers who loved her, and she had friends who loved her. And every time the case gets reversed, you have to drag the family through this, and they have to go through the process again. I don't think it's a stretch to say this ruined the life of this girl's poor mother.
At Alcala's 3rd trial in January 2010, the convicted killer decided to defend himself. District Attorney Matt spent weeks sparring with the 67-year-old and had to treat him with respect in the courtroom.
After my closing argument, that's when he realized, after I pointed at him and called him the devil, he realized I wasn't his buddy. I think the day he rots away and finally dies will be a good day for the whole world.
This killer's story began over 70 years ago. Rodney Alcala was born in San Antonio, Texas on the 23rd of August, 1943.
He was, on the surface, a perfectly normal boy. Didn't kill small animals or do any of those other horrible things that serial killers tend to go on to do. But in 1951, when he was 8, his grandmother, who was ill, decided that she wanted to go back to die in Mexico, and so the whole family left Texas and went to Mexico.
But while living south of the US border, Alcala's father left the family home to start a new life.
The father abandons the family at that point in time and then goes back to living in the US. And I think that's quite a significant thing. I think that Alcala's relationship with his father was quite an important one to him. And I think that's something that stayed with Alcala throughout his life, and I think it does feed into his offending behaviour.
Aged 12, Alcala's mother moved him and his 3 siblings to Los Angeles to start a new life back in the US.
He's popular, he's on the yearbook committee, he plays the piano, he runs for the school, he has girlfriends, he's on the surface an all-American or all-Mexican-American boy.
After graduating from high school, Alcala joined the army. But his time was cut short after a death in the family had a devastating effect on him.
Whilst he's in the army, he has a nervous breakdown, and this is after his father has died. And he's given a medical discharge from the army because he has this nervous breakdown. And then he kind of goes off the radar for a while. So I think this is the period in which he starts perhaps fantasizing. His offending starts to take shape in his mind, if not in reality.
And in September 1968, Alcala committed a horrific crime. He lured an 8-year-old girl into his Hollywood home.
This is the worst nightmare for any parent. Rodney Alcala and people like him are the reason why you can't send your kids walking to school alone. He kidnaps her, he rapes her. A good Samaritan sees her get into his car, and it doesn't look right. And he follows the car to the house, and it doesn't look right. Now, this is 1968, so it's long before cell phones. He finds a payphone, calls it in, the police get there, knock on the door. Rodney shows up naked and says, "Hey, I'll be right with you."
But 25-year-old Alcala wasn't planning on getting caught red-handed.
He runs out the back naked, okay? And the police officer, who's by himself, looks down, and it's one of those situations where it's save this bleeding little girl on the floor who's unconscious and very close to death. She was in a coma for 33 days after this happened. So it's save the little girl or catch the bad guy running out of the back. And he did the right thing. He saved the little girl. But that meant Alcala got away.
It was a horrifically depraved and violent attack on a child that seemingly came out of nowhere.
Where was the motive for that? There was no sexual abuse that we know of in his childhood. There was no antipathy to women. It was an unexpected bolt from the blue.
Alcala decided to run far away from his crimes, 3,000 miles across the US.
He does not hang around. He decides to leave Los Angeles and turns up in New York, where he enlists in the New York Film School under the name of John Berger.
This is quite a cunning way of both avoiding detection and of starting to build up these new personas, these new characters to present to the people that he comes into contact with. So he's somebody who can put on and shed identities just like a snake. And that's how I describe Alcala. He's constantly shedding his skin and reinventing himself.
Under the name John Berger, Rodney Alcala had begun teaching at a summer camp in New Hampshire. But by July 1971, his time was running out. 3 years after the attack on the 8-year-old girl in his own home, Alcala was still the prime suspect, and he was added to the FBI's nationwide 10 most wanted list. He was soon spotted by 2 of his students.
So 2 of these girls go to the post office to mail a letter, and they see Rodney Alcala's picture under the name of, Rodney Alcala. And they're like, hey, that's Mr. Berger. He works at the camp. So that's how he got caught. They extradite him back to California, and they try him for the kidnapping, and he received a life sentence.
But unbelievably, in August 1974, after serving less than 3 years, Alcala was freed and soon found work as a photographer.
I have no idea what the parole board was thinking. They're looking at this guy. He kidnapped, raped, and almost murdered an 8-year-old little girl who was a stranger. Wasn't even somebody that lived in his house. This was a girl walking down the street. That is as predatory, pathological, and psychotic as you can possibly get. And they released him after 34 months. He had a life sentence. They released him after 34 months.
But his freedom didn't last long. Just 2 months later, Alcala was arrested once more, this time for plying a minor with drugs.
He leaves state custody in August. In October, he kidnaps a 13-year-old and provides her with marijuana. And he's convicted of breaking his parole and selling drugs to a minor. He goes back to jail.
Again, Alcala's stay in prison was surprisingly brief. He was declared reformed by authorities after 2.5 years. In the summer of 1977, he was allowed by his parole officer to head back to New York.